And welcome to another edition of the Twins Wrap, brought to you by Jefferson Lines. Derek Hanson with you, along with Matt English. Jack Michaels taking a very much-needed rested day today. We're here with the television voice of the Minnesota Twins, Dick Bremer. Just to give you an update, Dick, unfortunately, the FM Redhawks, they lost to the Kansas City Monarchs in the championship game of the American Association. So Jack is probably... I hope he's sleeping all throughout the afternoon here into the evening and comes back tomorrow for morning sports. He deserves a rest between UND football and the FM Redhawks. He's been a little busy.
Yeah, well, but nobody's going to complain, right? Because It was just over a year ago. None of us were too busy, but I'm sure, when I get there, I'll probably crash and burn like Jack for a while, too.
What is that like? So we got a weekend and change left of the season. Is that kind of, do you really decompress after 6 long months of a regular season? I'm sure you didn't last year because it was only 2 months, but what is your mode of kind of operating after all the big long season there?
Yeah, I've told people that I don't even know that I enjoyed the off season last year because of everything else that was going on. It was a 2-month baseball season, but it just didn't seem possible to just relax and enjoy the off season. Nobody was vaccinated, and we had all sorts of anguish going on during the off season. So I'm looking forward to this off season, and hopefully it'll be a more normal off season. But usually what happens for me is for about 3 days, I really enjoy the solitude and the lack of structure to my days. And then it doesn't take too long, and I'm ready to ramp up again. So I'm hoping and guessing that'll be the case again this off season.
Yeah, for sure. I hope you don't mind me asking this, but I mean, you still enjoy this as much as ever, right? I mean, I think it's a passion that I don't know exactly your age, but I'm guessing that you want to go for. I don't know if you're going to go as long as Vin Scully, but it certainly seems like you enjoy this as much as you ever have.
I do enjoy it, and what I think the most of the enjoyment I get out of it now is where I'm doing it. You know, I'm doing it in my home turf, if you will, on my home turf. I think if I was doing St. Louis games, it wouldn't be quite the same, but I do enjoy it. I hope to keep doing it for a little while anyway. But I think if the last 18 months has taught us anything, and sometimes I wonder whether it has, but it doesn't make much sense to plan too far down the road because you never know how things are going to twist and turn between now and next year's opening day. So.
Yeah. I think for people like us, because we're in broadcasting, it can be mentally stressful and all that, but it's not like we're paving roads and breaking stones, right? And I think that's what makes it a little bit easier to keep working, and also a little harder to want to give it up, right?
Yeah, it's a privilege really to do what I get a chance to do because people who have to work for a living, and I've never considered myself to be one of those people, but people who actually work for a living can derive a lot of entertainment, relaxation, decompression, whatever, with the product I'm a part of. And that's, of course, one of the great disappointments this year. We were anticipating a really compelling baseball team to watch on a daily, nightly basis, and it didn't work out that way. And so that's one of the frustrations to carry forward into the off season in the hopes that next year will be a lot better.
A lot of people are talking about this big rebuilding plan, and I can understand that. If you look at the roster, going all the way to the 40-man roster, you can understand that to a point, but I remember going down to spring training, and it had been a long time, as you know, since I had been from spring training, probably since, 2008 until 2017, and they just came off that awful year, right, 56 wins or whatever it was, and I was around the clubhouse, and they were mad, like Brian Dozier and those guys were mad, and I said, people, you may be surprised about this team because they were really chomping at the bit to get there. They got some pieces, and they got to the wild card. And I'm not saying that's going to happen next year, but you can never rule out anything in the next year. And maybe I'm just too much of a glasses half full guy, but that's the way I look at this offseason going into 2022. I don't think there's any long-term plans that you really always have to look at.
No, and I think the problem this year has been pretty well identified, and it'd been nice to have Byron Buxton with 550 at bats with 2 weeks left to go in the season. But the biggest problem has been the pitching, and the starting rotation wasn't good at the start of the year. Actually, for the first month or so, it was okay. Then it fell apart, and I think one of the reasons it fell apart is the bullpen was not very good from opening day on. And as you look back, not just in Twins history, but in baseball history, and you can argue whether it's a good thing or not, but successful pitching staffs now are almost built from the back to the front. You've got to have a good bullpen. And one of the reasons Milwaukee is so good, in my opinion, and one of the reasons they've got three really good starters, in my opinion, is they've got a lockdown bullpen at the end with Williams and Hader. And so, as the Twins look to hopefully have a much better team next year, they're going to have to look at the bullpen. The presumption is Taylor Rogers will be back. There might even be a scenario out there, I know there is, where Alex Colomé will be back. But it's the intermediate guys. Last year it was Tyler Clippard, it was Matt Whistler, it was Trevor May, those guys that created a pretty big vacuum in the bullpen this year coming into this year. And the Twins paid an early price for that, and you could argue, I suppose, that they never really recovered.
Yeah, for sure. It was one of those things where they dug themselves such a big hole. Speaking of some of those young arms, I think Griffin Jax is going tonight for the Twins against the Cubs, and he's one of those guys that you really have to watch. I think we all have good confidence that Bailey Ober is going to be a part of the plan next year, but right now Griffin Jax is kind of doing an audition here the last week and a half, isn't he?
Yeah, he's very lucky to be given the opportunity that he's been given and will continue to get almost by default, because the Twins have had some injury issues. We don't know whether John Gant's going to rejoin the rotation. I suspect he will sometime this weekend against Toronto. Joe Ryan will make the start tomorrow night for the Twins in Chicago. But for Griffin Jax, the numbers, regardless of whether it's a small sample size or not, numbers don't lie. And what they've told us so far is that Griffin really needs to, improve his location. With the stuff that he has, he can't miss fire. And then, too, what we've seen is the offensive numbers really mushroom the second and third time through the order. So what that may suggest is if Griffin Jax is going to be a part of this Twins pitching staff next year, it might be as a reliever, not as a starter. But given the opportunities getting here, he's got every opportunity to convince us otherwise.
This is the Twins Wrap, brought to you by Jefferson Lines. Derek Hanson with you, along with Matt English hanging out, the brand manager of 740 The Fan, and Dick Bremer, the television voice of the Minnesota Twins, with us here. Let me ask you a little bit about you mentioned Toronto this weekend and watching them and Barrios pitching on Sunday. And, boy, it's hard for me not to pull for two guys that, are really classy and I really like. I mean, the Jays and the Rays with Nelson Cruz, too, it's going to be hard not to pull for those guys.
Yeah, and if you look specifically at Toronto, and we tried to make the point during the telecast last weekend, and we'll try to reinforce it again this weekend, what the Twins need to do is do what the Blue Jays did successfully. They felt they had a good core. Now, Toronto's core is younger, and you could argue even better than the Twins core, but there's the core of Buxton, Sano, Kepler, Polanco, and all that. That's okay. That's pretty good. But what the Blue Jays did is they went out and found Marcus Semien and Robbie Ray, and that really bolstered not only the position players, with Semien hitting more than 40 home runs, but also the pitching staff. So that's the challenge for the Twins and a lot of other teams. Go out and find this next year's Marcus Semien and Robbie Ray, and then automatically your team will be a whole lot better.
And, of course, if the Jays go on and probably will knock the Yankees out. So that's all the better, right?
Yeah, they've got a chance to make sure the Yankees don't even get in the playoffs. They've got a series the last week of the year. A week from now, it'll be the Yankees at the Rogers Center for 3 games. And the Blue Jays now lead the Yankees by just a half game after last night's action. But depending on how it all plays out, they'll have a chance to mathematically eliminate the Yankees, perhaps, if they take care of business this weekend, unless the Yankees start playing a whole lot better baseball.
I think we've talked about this in years past, but I'm kind of curious your take on the format right now. I don't mind it, 2 wild cards getting in, and you get a reward for finish off the division. I know there's been a lot of talk in LA about the fact that they might have a 1-game playoff after, they have a potential here of winning 100 games, which doesn't seem fair if they can't get by San Francisco here. But I guess I kind of like it that way. You do get rewarded. Maybe I'm biased to the 87 Twins team because they would have probably finished, 5th or 6th in the American League East in 1987. But I think it does give you a little reward for the divisional winner.
Yeah, I don't think I would prefer that they don't disincentivize winning the division.
Yeah.
If the Dodgers play a wild card game, it's against the Cardinals, and John Lester sticks to them. Whatever might happen, and they're out after one game. Well, then win the division like the Giants. They took the lead early in the season. If they hang on and win the division, there has to be some reward for that. There'd be some irony that if the Giants won the division by a game or two over the Dodgers, because for a good part of my childhood, it seemed like it was the other way around. The Dodgers would win the National League by a game or two over, a really good Giants team that had Mays and Marichal and McCovey and Cepeda and all those guys. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I can see baseball going to a 2 out of 3 in the wild card round, though. That I think might be doable, might be something I think baseball and the collective bargaining agreement with the Players Association will be looking for additional postseason revenue. That might be the best way to do that.
Dick, talking about a Twins division rival, Salvador Perez hit his 46th home run last night for the Royals. That broke Johnny Bench's record of 45 home runs in 1970 by a primary catcher. 75% of his starts in the season came from the catching position. Is that a record that you ever thought would be broken? And just how impressive is that accomplishment?
Well, to answer both parts of your question, I thought the record could be broken, but not by a Kansas City Royal. He plays half his games in what is arguably the worst home run hitters ballpark in the American League, and he's got 46 of them now. So Kansas City, for a while, if they were excited if they had a 20 home run a year hitter. Well, a couple of years ago, Soler hit 48 home runs for them, and now Perez might hit at least that many. It really is remarkable what he's doing, particularly when you consider where he's doing it. Kauffman Stadium is beautiful. It's still, as they moved the fences in a few years ago in the gaps, but it's still not by any means a home run hitter's ballpark, but that doesn't seem to bother Sal Perez.
Let me ask you a little bit about the series here against the Cubs. As you know, I was in Chicago in 2018 where I love the heat. Even as a big guy, I like the heat, but that was unbearable. That was one of the hottest weekends I've ever lived in my life off of Lake Michigan. There was so humid. But it's kind of unfortunate that this series at Wrigley Field is in September, right? I mean, this is kind of a thing where Twins fans would come flock to Wrigley Field, and the friendly confines were everyone was really nice. All the Cubs fans are nice. The Twins fans kind of got ripped off for these two games here in September.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that both teams are where they are in the standings.
Yeah.
But, I think everybody would love to be a visiting team at Wrigley Field for a weekend, but they do have to play weekday games too. And I remember very well the weekend series you talked about a few years ago. It frankly was the most dangerous situation I think I've ever been in. Bobby Wilson, the catcher, almost fainted in the batter's box, ended up walking, scored a run, and afterwards said he had no memory of his trip around the bases. That's how hot it was. Now, Bobby was in his mid-30s at the time, but there were guys in their early to mid-20s like Rosario and Kepler who came off the field with heat stroke. So it really was a dangerous situation, and thankfully we'll have much cooler autumnal-type weather for the two games tonight and tomorrow.
I joked this morning, Dick, that it's too warm when it was just too warm to even drink beer. I mean, literally, I had a beer sitting in there, and I got sick. That's how dehydrated you get so quickly with the alcohol because it was unbearable. And I love the warm weather, as I mentioned, but much more on the lake than I do in the concrete jungle of Chicago because that was like nothing I've ever experienced before.
Well, and to underscore your point, Kent Herbeck had a group of family and friends that he had out in Chicago for the weekend. And I think for the entire weekend, he stayed for about 2.5 innings.
Yeah.
He'd go to the ballpark and sit there, and it was oppressively hot and humid. And it really became a health issue, not just for the players, but some of the fans too.
Yeah. Well, my dad and I actually left after a few innings. We went to the air condition of the bar there in Wrigleyville because actually, we said we spent this money to get in here. We got to see it, but boy, that was just too much. But that won't be the case here for sure. Tonight, Wrigley Field, kind of a bummer too that you're not going to get to enjoy the friendly confines. And hopefully, out of anything for you, Dick, I hope in 2022 that changes. I think that's the one thing I hope. I know that you're missing going on the road.
Well, I don't think I or anybody else for that matter can do their jobs well doing it as we've been asked to do it. Now, last year was a different deal. It was a matter of public safety, and we'll certainly hope that next year we get to travel with the team. I believe the fans deserve that. They deserve having that connection to the team. And in reality, Derek, when the team is on the road, and we're here, other than 3.5-minute manager Zoom call, we, meaning collectively now, not just the Twins announcers, but those of us who do television or radio but aren't able to travel with the team, we're frankly no more connected to the team than the fans themselves, and that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot because, as you know, I love kind of getting my one-on-one interviews. I think it was one of the things that kind of broke me through in this business doing talk radio is being able to get some of these things done. And boy, when reporters and all that can get in the clubhouse again, that's going to be an interesting thing too, because I don't know when I'll be able to do any coverage on spring training. That's just the way it may have changed the game, I think, maybe for the worse as far as really having that interaction with a lot of the players.
Well, and I'm encouraged that we're hearing that NBA teams and NHL teams are going to allow much fuller access, clubhouse access included, in the winter, fall and winter into the spring. So hopefully that'll be the case when baseball rolls around again next spring as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, enjoy the game tonight. Again, the Twins at the Cubs. The radio side will be here on KFGO over on 790 and 104.7. Do appreciate it. Enjoy it on Valley Sports North tonight, Dick. Always appreciate your time.
We'll talk again next Tuesday.
You bet. Dick Bremer with us here. Again, the Twins Wrap brought to you by Jefferson Lines each and every Tuesday. We only have a couple episodes left, unfortunately, with Dick Bremer. But, boy, it went by fast. But it's always fun to talk a little baseball with the television voice of the Minnesota Twins, the pride of Dumont, Minnesota. And I was going to ask him a little bit because, he grew up a Minnesota sports fan like all of us, what he thought of the fiasco. Maybe next week we can ask him, well, see how the Seahawks game goes? And then maybe he can give us a little bit of insight on everything that's going to be, what he thinks of that as a Vikings fan. Because I think he tries to talk about he's a Twins fan, but he doesn't say we and all that much like a lot of us do as fans. Because he's a broadcaster, right?
Right. You have to display some level of objectivity towards.
Even though he's not.
Right,
most of us aren't.
But I mean, with that Seahawks game, if the Vikings